He could make the sweetest sounds with his voice and his guitar. Songs like By the Time I Get to Phoenix and Wichita Lineman put him at the top of the charts and earned him his own network television show in the 70s. But inside country star Glen Campbell, there was no harmony. There were demons driving him to dangerous extremes. And tonight he tells Bob Brown about the days that nearly destroyed his career and his life, and the faith that finally saved him. At 58 years old, the Rhinestone Cowboy is on the road again.
Glen Campbell always said he was from Delight, Arkansas, because at least Delight was on the map.
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk.
He was really from Billstown, down the road and into the woods.
That makes me tend to leave my sleeping bag rolled up and stashed behind your couch.
Everybody, it seemed like we kind of got out of here as soon as we were old enough.
Glen was one of 12 children, the youngest boy, born in the Depression year 1936, in a house on Bell's Bluff, overlooking the Little Missouri River.
That keeps you in the back roads by the rivers of my memory.
Electricity? No electricity. No running water, no nothing.
Your father was a sharecropper.
Yeah. You give a share of what you raise to the guy that owns the land.
A lot of Depression families learned to play musical instruments because they couldn't afford much outside entertainment. But Glen was so good on his mail-order guitar that under different circumstances, he might have been identified as a child prodigy. As for his voice, well, because he was the youngest boy, he had to sing the highest harmony parts. And according to 3 other Campbell brothers we met, that's how Glen's now famous vocal range was fixed. Gerald, Shorty, and Lyndall Campbell had already spoken for the other parts.
Well, it's like I can't stand this loneliness.
And how does that go?
These 4 walls and the ceiling drives me mad.
My part's on top.
I can't lose this loneliness, for you are all the happiness I have.
My mom was always, for you are all, he was always up there in the high, you know.
I'd have to have an 8-foot ladder to get up where he does.
It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Glen Campbell.
He still retained that aura of a fresh-faced kid from Arkansas when he broke through on television in 1968 on the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour. In a musical era that included the best work of artists ranging from the Beatles to Bob Dylan, Glen Campbell was one of the biggest stars of all. The Grammy winner as Best Male Vocalist in 1967 and for Album of the Year in 1968. He had paid his dues as one of the most respected studio musicians in Los Angeles, but he had never learned to read music, and he wasn't a prolific songwriter.
By the time I get to Phoenix,
He had that instinctive judgment from childhood about chords and harmony and how to make someone else's song his own.
on her door.
I saw By the Time I Get to Phoenix, and I was getting homesick during that period. I hadn't been back to Arkansas in a while, and I was really getting homesick. And I changed the end. He had the idea, you just didn't know I would really go. They want to see on the end. That's why Jimmy Webb wrote it, but she just didn't know I would really go. That's the only thing I changed.
His biggest hit was one of the anthems of the 70s, Rhinestone Cowboy. By the time he recorded it, even he recognized that it could be an appropriate description of his own career.
Well, I really don't mind the rain, and a smile can hide all the pain.
Behind the exuberant, clean-cut image he projected so well, he was deeply troubled in many respects. His extraordinary musical talent had been full-grown from the beginning, but he barely got a chance to do the rest of his growing up. Beginning with a teenage marriage that produced one daughter in Albuquerque and continuing through a second marriage, he couldn't make his family life work.
There'll be a load of compromising on the road to my horizon.
Always in the background was that picture of a father and mother holding together a large family in merciless poverty. That example raised some fundamental questions about what Glen Campbell had really accomplished.
You know, when do you grow up? When do you become a man? Or when do you become an adult? The home, the family, the good marriage. I thought that I had come up short on that end of it, and that's probably where my insecurity lies. I had to have that security with a wife and kids like I grew up, with Mom and Dad.
When his second marriage failed after his television show was canceled, Campbell, who had never been able to hold his liquor well, began to slide headlong into addictions that often took control of his life and seriously altered his personality. He said he first tried cocaine near the end of his second marriage.
You got one dose of cocaine, and that's what started you?
Yeah, that started. It was, I felt, I felt something there that there was really a false sense of security. It made me oblivious to a lot of things, I'll put it that way. It made everything easier to say or easier to do.
Those were really horrible years for him, for us, for those of us who were around him.
Campbell's business manager, Stan Schneider, was as shocked as anyone at the drastic personality changes he witnessed.
He became a really mean person. You know, I remember him insulting airline stewardesses for no reason. Just, he was rude. He was, when he was under the influence of either drugs or alcohol, he was a different man.
Campbell's public image remained essentially intact, even during the publicity over his third marriage to Sarah Davis, the former wife of another country star, Mac Davis. Behind the scenes of that marriage, which would also fail in a haze of drugs, Campbell says he would read the Bible incessantly, sometimes engaging in marathon sessions, spouting quotes and dogma, while strung out late at night on cocaine.
But I was looking for truth. I was searching for a way out of the situation, probably the hole I dug for myself. You know, I'd always been to two marriages. And I was probably just looking for a way out as I look back at it.
What kind of mental state were you in then? Were you close to a breakdown, or was it just something?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I had to go. I went in a hospital. This was in Nashville, and that was between relationships, I should say. And I had to go in the hospital. I don't know how long I was there. Probably 3 or 4 days. And I didn't remember any of it. They kept me knocked out all the time I was there.
The years ahead will find us together, you and I.
Campbell would never get more press than he did during a volatile relationship with Tanya Tucker. He was 44, she was 21. And in counterpoint to the songs they performed, they were often seen in loud public fights. Once tore the drapes off the wall of the Plaza Hotel. And in a new book called Rhinestone Cowboy, which details much of that period, Campbell says he also experienced the most terrifying moment of his life when he went with her to a house where cocaine was being freebased, a process that involves igniting cocaine with ether and smoking it.
I remember laying there on my stomach and just sweating profusely for hours and hours and hours, from probably 2 in the morning till 7 or 8 in the morning. And I woke up on that couch in a home in this town that I didn't know where I was. But I just know that my heart was just, it felt like for hours it was just going to come out of my chest. I never did that again. I never freebased cocaine again.
Why was that relationship so tempestuous? Why did you keep
there wasn't any
going
truth
back?
going on with it. What is that? You can lead a hog away from the slop, man, but you can't keep him away. You know? He'll go right back to it if you turn him loose.
And that's the way you were?
That's the way I was. But for some reason, I just flat couldn't get myself out of it.
Southern nights, have you ever felt the southern night?
Campbell's manager wanted to fire musicians with drug habits, but he couldn't really enforce the policy because Campbell often did drugs with his players on tour. It was inevitable that with the bad publicity that had piled up, despite the fact that Campbell continued performing regularly, audiences would eventually read their own conclusions into a less than stellar performance.
I could feel the hostility in the audience, you know. What's the matter with you, boy? You know.
You got some of that?
Oh, yeah. Did you hire something?
Did you ever try to talk him out of it to get him to stop?
Oh, I tried a lot of times to talk him out of it. He denied it. He would get very mad. We would argue a lot. about it. But then when he came out of it, he wouldn't remember.
So I did little things like tape record him. And then when he was sober, I'd let him hear the tape and hear what he sounded like. And I'd give him the tape and I'd walk out of the room because I didn't think he'd listen to it if I were there.
Kimberly Woolen was a dancer, a Radio City Music Hall Rockette, when she and Glen met in 1981. They married in '82 and have 3 children.
You said that you wanted a drug-free marriage, or that was one of the conditions that
Yeah,
you...
I really put my foot down on that. We had our first child, and he was just a little teeny baby, and I know that he got into some cocaine one night, and I told him, I told you that we're not going to have that in our marriage. And he said, you're not taking my boy. And I said, you tell it to my lawyer. You know, the little fight going back and forth. And then he just started crying. He said, I messed up one time and you're going to leave me. So that was the last time he ever did it.
Oh, Jesus, bring back the boy in me. Put your hand on my heart.
At one point, desperate to demonstrate some commitment to changing his life, Glen returned home to Arkansas. When he was still a child here, his brother Lyndall had once saved him from drowning by pulling him from the backwaters of the Little Missouri River. This time, Glen and Kimberly and Lyndall, now a retired preacher, waded into the cold waters of Saline Creek. It was, said Glen, the second time his brother had saved him.
And it was both times it was water, but the Lord saved him the last time in water.
You baptized him.
I baptized him.
With his wife and children, Campbell regularly attends the North Baptist Church in Phoenix. After his baptism, he says, he gave up his addictions by degrees. First cocaine in 1983, then alcohol in 1986.
You said that when you were using alcohol or drugs, people had no trouble being around you. But sometimes people are uncomfortable now if you want to talk about your religion.
Yeah, oh, they are. The friends of mine that are still out there doing it or smoking a little dope or doing a little cocaine, they don't understand it. I'm alien to them now.
I can't stand this loneliness. These 4 walls and the ceiling drive me mad.
The Campbells now own a lot of land in the area where their father once sharecropped, and there's a family cemetery where their parents are buried. Most recently, their mother, Carrie, who died nearly 3 years ago. It was around that time, Glen says, that he heard himself talking to his own son and arriving at the answer to one of those fundamental questions he had lived with for most of his life.
I remember it like yesterday. I realized my childhood slipped away.
I said, son, you know, you better be lucky you got a mom and dad. And I said, I don't have a mom and dad now. And I started crying, and it's because I just realized, bang, you know, all that childhood that I went through, everything with mom and dad, that was all gone.
But I would like to go back again. Oh, Jesus.
I realized that I had to be the dad, that I had to be the adult in the family. And that's when I straightened out my life.
But I want to be the boy in me.
You know, Bob, I recently interviewed Elton John, and it's a similar story of the drugs and the drinking and so forth, but they're still able to perform.
There are so many people who went through similar episodes and either went broke or lost their careers. And in the case of Elton John and Glen Campbell, both, I think it was just the idea that both had such prodigious talent that somehow it sustained them even in the worst of times.
Now, what's he doing now?
Well, like a lot of artists, he's building a theater in Branson, Missouri. It's close to home. He'll play there, his own theater, the Glen Campbell Good Time Theater. He'll play there 6 months out of the year, and occasionally the brothers go up and sing with him, too.
So it is a good time for him, and he's made it back, and that's good news.